they declined over a period of 50 to 100 years, following a explosion of the population and then a shortage of food that led to a collapse. So we don't seem to be able to control our population. There's a bit of light at the end of the tunnel. We are now. Population is peaking. I've just studied population in my Introduction to Sustainability course at the University of Illinois. I'm studying now. And population is declining in most places. The only exception really is Africa, but even there, you'll notice the birth rate is plummeting presently. This is just a phenomena that's been very well observed called demographic transition. Because when you improve the healthier population, the death rate goes down. So all these babies are being born, they survived. People were used to having a lot of babies, not because they're stupid or they want to destroy the earth. Got to get so many of these prejudices out of our minds and the minds of our friends and family. Even someone today around the table said we're being swamped by Asians. I said, well, I'd rather feel good about it. I'd rather like the Asians coming to Australia, But we still got a lot of these prejudices coming through. So the population is stabilising, but it's still, as you know, extremely high. It's been in the hundreds of millions for all of human beings being on the earth. It rose to about 2 billion at the Second World War, and then it's tripled in that it's got to 7 billion in just that short 60 years since the Second World War. Okay, but it is reducing, so we've got that, but we've got to get our food supply safe. Now, climate could change, a drought or a war, and all of a sudden the finely tuned system of supermarkets, fuel stations, police forces, transport, everything else we rely on breaks down. Take an example, the Mayan civilization. Everyone knows about the Mayan calendar. That seems to run out at the end of this year, the solstice. What's going to happen? I don't know. I've studied a bit of the Mayan calendar. It's fascinating stuff. And I hope it's all good news. I hope it really is that change to a new way of living that we all imagine and we all know is certainly possible. Venus Project, if you will. The Mayan civilization was a great civilization in Central America. Now, 500 years ago, this civilization, this empire, just vanished. It collapsed. They still left their beautiful temples in the jungles of Central America. It was a drought that destroyed them. The Mayans were really, they were growing enough food just to support their fantastic civilization, their huge population. They thought they were doing so well. Change in the weather, not enough food. They start fighting over the food they have. The whole thing collapsed. Anyone knows the same could happen with us. Okay. So I want to suggest to you that all around the world we are presently approaching tipping points at which this very carefully sustained situation we're in, this overexploitation of natural systems that underpin our food, health and survival, are in decline and nearing collapse at a global and a local level. So I just want to take a local example and look at the Murray River Basin. This is in the news a lot, the Murray-Darling Commission and the report, how do we save our Murray River? It almost died in the last drought. Okay, what can we do? So let's just look at a bit of history on the Murray-Darling Basin. In the 1920s, we removed 2,000 gigalitres, that is 2,000 billion litres of water for irrigation, beautiful fresh water. In the 90s, this had increased by 550% to 11,000 gigalitres we're removing from the basin. But rainfall hasn't increased by 550%. In fact, rainfall's now reducing it. There's a lot of evidence it's reducing due to the expansion of the Hadley cells. I'll get into that later. But rainfall's actually reducing in our Murray-Darling Basin. Now, there's
no trees anymore to catch it.
Runs off, doesn't it? It doesn't get to sink in because of our land clearing. That's it. The mouth of the Murray River, the greatest river in the continent, closed in 2002, and it didn't open again until 2011, due in part to the record floods in southern Queensland and the blocking off of several lake systems downstream, which were sacrificed. So it did open in 2011 because of those record floods that we saw. Brisbane was devastated, farming was devastated in Queensland, a lot of it was. If they hadn't have built, people don't know, but they hadn't have built that Wivenhoe Dam as a response to the 70s flood in Brisbane, And I know it may not have been perfectly managed. There was a commission into that. But if they hadn't have built that dam and that hadn't operated as it did in Brisbane, the flood peak would have been 2 metres higher than it actually was. It was a record flood, destroyed so many people's homes, caused absolute chaos throughout the city. You can see that with just small changes in the weather, big changes can happen to us. I don't think we're really understanding that at the moment. Okay, so even with this record flood, some of those lakes in New South Wales, they didn't open those floodgates. They sacrificed them. So that hurts our birds and those local environments, but that's what they have to do. So in 2011, now, with the return of La Nina weather system, the ecological health of 20 out of the 23 catchments in the Murray-Darling system were actually, no, I think that's actually at the end of the last La Nina the return. At the last El Nino event, 20 out of our 23 catchments in the Murray-Darling Basin were classed as in poor health or near collapse. That's 20 out of 23 of the catchments in the basin, right? Okay, El Nino's just returned, and this cycle could possibly be worse than the last. There's indications of that. Now, just juxtaposed to this, we have the governing body, the Murray-Darling Authority. You've just backed down on an evidence-based rescue plan. The Wentworth group of concerned scientists and other great scientists, great thinkers have said, right, this is the minimum we need to do to save that river system that so much of our food depends on, and so much of our ecology and our bird species, etc. Now, just because a few angry irrigation farmers burned copies of the report outside a consultation in Griffith, New South Wales, they canned the report and they've slashed the measures to save that. We're putting our food security at risk, the viabilities of our towns, cities, and our livelihoods. The now rejected Murray-Darling report states, if the focus does not swing back towards considering water required for the environment, then the nation risks irretrievably damage the attributes of the basin that enable it to be so productive to provide that food for us. So the ecosystem must survive for us to survive. Okay, so that's a local example of how our food security is really, really finely balanced. But for a global example, let's turn to, really interesting subject of peak oil. You may have heard the term, but not many people know much about it. The peak of geological oil discoveries occurred in the 1960s, right across the world. Discoveries have steadily declined since. There are no new areas to explore except the North and South Pole, and that's why a lot of the politicians, a lot of the powers don't really mind that the Arctic sea ice is melting because they think there might be some great oil and gas they can get at underneath it.
I've read the other day.
Yep.
Greenpeace one.
Fantastic. We'll push that for sure. So discoveries but the measure that threatens our civilization, our lives, is actually not peak oil discovery, it's peak oil production. A lot of people don't know, but everything in our society, it's plastics, it's agriculture, it's the tractors that grow our food, it's all oil, it's a transport everywhere. Fertilizers, oil is in medicine, it's in so many things. Demand for oil is high, it keeps growing, as new developing countries like China and India come online with their cars. I mean, the amount of cars in China is exploding at the moment. It's going from just a few million a few years ago to 70 million now. It's just really booming. And no one can say that they don't have a right to drive a car, the right that we have. Now, Matthew Simmons is an energy sector investment banker and a one-time advisor to President Bush. But don't let that put you off, because he said, I've studied the oil depletion issue for too long now to have any remaining doubts as to the severity of the issue. But I'm still amazed at the limited knowledge that exists amongst politicians and the public, even in the United States. Peaking of oil cannot be predicted accurately, but it will occur. By then, an alternative solution is too late. My analysis lends me to worry that peaking is at hand. if I'm right, the unforeseen consequences are devastating. The facts are too serious to ignore. Dr. Samsam Bakhtiari of the National Oil Company of Iran said the world's giant oil fields, Russia, the Middle East and Texas, are drying off. There are no new regions to explore, no new oil fields such as, or so I should say that new oil fields such as the deep ocean are being developed at great cost and danger. We saw the oil spills off the northwest shelf of Australia and also the Gulf of Mexico off the coast of Florida that caused such ecological devastation and was so expensive. Now all those billions of dollars to fix that, even to cap it, that all goes into the cost of fuel. Sometime, you don't know when, it gets to a level where the economy cannot pay for that amount of fuel. I'll give you an example. You look at Greece. Greece going through an economic crisis at the moment. A lot of the countries in Europe, America even, their economy is stalling. You won't read in the paper, you won't see it on Fox News or CNN or any of these people, right? They won't tell you the truth. But a lot of that economic slowdown is peak oil. Oil's becoming so expensive, countries are having to pay more and more of their money to buy that oil, just to function, just to keep moving. Otherwise, the economy cannot function without that oil. Everything's there. So it's pulling back on the growth, and it's really collapsing a lot of those economies. It's not hurting America as much because they've still got a bit of their own oil. Europe don't have their own oil, except some in the north, and they're not struggling. The Scandinavian countries that have oil, they're not struggling. But all those other countries are really struggling. So you can see that we're really close to that. Bakhtiari says that there is no alternative that can replace oil in the medium term. That is, within years. We can in the long term. There's plenty of alternatives, so I'll get onto that. Bakhtiari said, adding up these facts envisions a global oil crunch on the horizon, most probably within the next decade. Within this decade, that crunch is coming. And the New Scientist journal ran a cover story. Quote, crisis looms where demand for oil outstrips supply and geologists think we have only a decade. That was in 2003. We've got 1 year to go. Now, if you look at global oil production, since 2005, production even in Saudi Arabia has dropped by 1%. That's the biggest oil producer in the world. Now, it's been dropping in most places around the world, but Russia have been, they went through a great economic crisis. A lot of their oil contracted back because of the collapse of the Soviet Union. They've been developing their oil fields at maximum speed. Over the period from 2005 till now, they've increased about 7.5%. Now, analysts, the best people in the business, has said they were going to increase by 10%. They didn't even get there. They got to 7.5%. Last year, they increased production by 0.5%. And the Russian economy minister warned there is no further scope for increasing Russian oil production. The party's over. Matt Simmons has even written a book, The Party's Over. So since 2005, global oil production has been steady. We've been rising, now it's been steady. It's a bell curve. I can't say when that will be, but the original prophet, if you like, the originator of peak oil theory, is in 1949, a man named Marion King Hubbard, M. King Hubbard. Now, he predicted that America's production of oil would peak in 1971. He was absolutely spot on. He predicted that way back. He was absolutely spot on. He's predicted that world oil production will peak in 1995. But he said, if OPEC pulls back, the oil producing companies, particularly the Middle East, pull back on their production, that may be put off for 10 years. He couldn't see it beyond that. Well, 2005 was that year. So he was spot on. The thing I say about M. King Hubbard is this guy wasn't a conspiracy theorist or